Good evening, Chris. Lisa, thank you very much for having me. I don't know if you know this, but I exited the speaking platforms at the beginning of the year to have a bit of a holiday. But I was actually really very grateful for your invite because it was something that I'd missed greatly.
Ah,
Um, in
I didn't
part due to the fact that I've got a 1 year old and aren't really sleeping much and all the hassle that comes with late night feeds and all that stuff. I don't think I was up to scratch, but I've really been looking forward to speaking here, and it's been an absolute shock to see Sam here. I had no idea he'd be here, so it's always good to see Sam. And actually, before the second lockdown, we exchanged messages to maybe meet, and that was all obviously put on hold. He was coming to London, where I'm based, and I thought it was always good to catch up with a cup of coffee and whatever. Him and Engin are a proper power team. Um, Personalities larger than life for the most part, which is always good for a broker. It can be quite a cold subject when you look at just the pure numbers. So that was good. And I see was here, so there's a couple of other people that I recognise. So hopefully the talk won't be too stale for some. I haven't prepared a deck or anything like that. I normally work better just talking to people. So I'm just going to talk. Sometimes I talk really fast. So if I say something and it flies by, stop me, unmute yourself, say something, step up. Interaction is 100% appreciated and wanted. So if I do go too fast, it's normally because you're the only people I've spoken to today. And that's an absolute treat for me. um, so Chris had sent through a set of just questions, maybe touch points to go on. So what I'm going to do before I ask that is just by a show of hands, or I know those who haven't got their cameras on, you can push the little hands up button if you don't want your video up. How many people have been to an auction or bought a property from an auction? Okay, so we've got quite a learned bunch. That's just the people with their hands up that I can see. Brilliant. Okay. There he is. Oh, I knew he'd jump in. The opportunity was too great. Good to see you, my friend.
Looking forward
there
to
he is. So, in which case, I'm not going to do that. How many of you bought? How many of you sold? Ego trip thing that most people like to talk about, but I'll just start, and it's probably the most basic question, but it's basic because not a lot of people ask it. But it was quite refreshing to see Chris mentioned. Just the first question was, why are auctions good for property investors? Now, auctions are a double-edged sword. If you can appreciate the positives of the auction and you understand the downsides, I think it's a phenomenal marketplace for property investors to be in. I've been operating in auctions for 18 years, 16 properly, but my first ever property purchase was through auction 18 years ago when I was very, very, very young. But my theory as to why auctions are good is because the auction market works at almost a wholesale discount. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there that don't like the term BMV, and I think it's been characterized, and technically nothing is BMV, but if you were to follow the premise that if there is a 3-bedroom house on a road up for sale and it sells for £250,000, and next door property in the exact same condition, a mirror of the last property that sold 2 weeks ago, goes to auction at £180,000, you have to perceive that there is a massive price differential there, which accommodates, some of the lesser ideal elements of auction. So in reality, auction companies try to list properties at the point of guide anywhere between 20 to 30% below market value or below a perceived market value. Now, they do that because they know that the terms of the auction are uncomfortable. So the terms of most auctions are the property goes live, you're given your limited information puzzle, you get the catalogue entry, you then normally have to wait a week or even longer for some auctioneers to get viewings. Then you have to wait for a full legal pack, and all this time, you're getting more information, but it's still not the full picture that you'd be able to do if you were exchanging with an estate agent. to make matters worse, if your offer is accepted, you put down a 10% non-refundable deposit. Okay, so you're unable to complete, you can't get the finance, your lawyer doesn't like the legal pack, change of circumstances, whatever it may be, you're losing that 10% deposit. That's an uncomfortable proposition for anybody, Then you have another deadline, and that deadline is the point of completion. If you're looking at sales which are brought to the auction by asset managers on behalf of repossessions, a completion can be 14 whole days. They don't include bank holidays. It's 14 complete days, 2 solid weeks. There are some housing associations and some local authorities who do 10-day completions from the point of exchange, which is even more uncomfortable. But obviously, Sam's been talking about bridging, which is, if you're not full cash, then bridging is probably your only real option to kind of meet the completion on time, and then go bridge to traditional or whatever your personal circumstances determine. So I'm talking about the negatives. So I'm talking about limited information, a lot of your own due diligence, the fact that you are going to be competing against X number of other investors. People always forget that part. Now, everyone likes the direct to vendor off market opportunities where you get, you create a bit of a ring fence around the vendor and the asset, and you get to negotiate on your own private terms. Auctions don't really offer you that. But what they offer you is per calendar month, a minimum for the last 8 years has been 2,000 properties sold per calendar month at auction. And it's packaged up in a nice little bow. If you're on Essential Information Group, you can set up your own alerts as you would do if you were setting up alerts on Rightmove. And you get to see all the properties that you're looking for. And the opportunity is there because actually, although there is other competition, the competition is limited. There are a lot of owner-occupiers, end users who won't enter into that marketplace. There are other investors, but as we know with investors, is every investor is doing something differently. The way they cost a refurb is different, whether they're going to buy a refurb, rent, resell, whatever it is they're going to do. Some may be buying it to convert it into an HMO. Some may be buying it because they own the house next door, in which case they can pay quite a bit more for this. So there's so many circumstances to take into effect. And the reason I like it is before I took auctions seriously, so really the first 2 years of my investing life, I was working as an estate agent. And as an estate agent, you walk the walk, you talk the talk. I was buying properties myself. And the problem with that is I would be making offers that would, you'd negotiate, you'd then exchange, or you get close to exchange and it would just fall through. And one week, I think I had something fall through. I must have spent maybe 6 or 8 weeks. And actually, there's another property thing happened very recently where I was part of a transaction which wasn't at auction, and that transaction, we started talking about doing this deal in March, and it fell to pieces 3 weeks ago. I mean, for most people, that's probably standard. You would take that with a pinch of salt. That's the name of the game. I find nothing more infuriating than investing at least what felt like 100 hours worth of work, worth of due diligence, worth of cajoling and getting this done, and subject twos and arranging, leases signed on subsale, etc. All these different. It was a complicated deal, in fairness. See you later, Sam. Thanks for sticking around for a bit. But that fell to pieces, and the annoyance factor was huge because when I do due diligence on a property, once I've kind of shortlisted it at auction, I would have spent maybe 4 to 6 hours. That's not just doing due diligence on the legal pack, that's going outside the legal pack and looking for more. And I realized actually I wasn't being effective with how I was obtaining properties, like where my deal flow was coming from, because I was ignoring a lot of other opportunities. So I bought that one property from auction, the first ever property, the one that blew up. And actually, because it blew up, I made quite a bit of money from having that fixed and resold. But the process is so simple. Once you understand it, it's so simple. The lots go into the catalogue closes. You then have 3 to 4 weeks to find the property that you like, do your due diligence, get ready for the auction, exchange complete. I don't know many transactions, unless you're in the height of the market, or when you've got something like you know, a stamp duty levy tax break holiday, where actually people will just transact quickly because they want to make sure they meet those kind of deadlines. The auction creates deadlines, and I really like that. I think if you're looking at scaling up and you're looking at getting more opportunities across your patch or through the door, then auctions is fantastic for that. I don't want to kind of rose tint how auctions work, because obviously, you know, a lot can go wrong. And actually part of the consultancy that myself and my business partner who wrote the book do is helping people not make those mistakes at auction, because there are some blindingly obvious and easy ones that people, you know, if you don't know it's a blind spot, you don't know. So those are my thoughts. So, Chris, yeah.
So that is really interesting. So when you said it's sort of quite simple, I was going to challenge you and say, well, if it's simple, do you need to write a book on it? Is part of it. But I mean, I get that you've got your deadlines, haven't you? You've got your 28 days or your 14 days, and that's really good. The legal packs can be a bit of an issue in themselves. So I've found them quite an issue, because you can't. They're not always in sort of normal English, so that they do need interpreting. I suppose what I'm doing, Jay, is sort of challenging the simple bit. I know I do get your bit about it is really frustrating when you invest an awful lot of time in a property to have it withdrawn close to exchange. But sort of equally in an auction, you can have properties withdrawn from an auction that the purchase can be agreed prior to the auction, and sort of I know it's a shorter period, but sort of some of the same things can happen. I suppose what you're saying is that you're mitigating that risk because it's a shorter period. I'm getting seasick now, Jay.
Sorry, yeah. Here you go. So I take your points on board, but I mean the people kind of the reason why I think, and it depends on your risk profile, and I think that is a really big part of everything, right? You kind of have to measure your risk versus the opportunity, so your risk reward. But you know, when you're looking at a property with an estate agent and you make an offer that's accepted, you're making an offer based on even less information than you would be making an offer once you do the offer at the auction. Because the auction, you get the full legal pack, the leases, the titles, the searches, everything in advance. Okay, so any works that you're putting into that, you get a solicitor to review the pack. All of that is based on tangible assets that they can go through and they can look at and they can advise you on. Now, when you're doing things via private treaty, that's not the case. You then have to, before you actually see anything and can whittle down and get the questions right and streamline your own process, you're most likely spending more money on solicitors and requiring advice, and the process is longer, more protracted, more drawn out, and it's probably, for the most part, more expensive if you don't include the fees of the auction, which we can come on to later. You know, for me, what people forget is the original process for buying and selling property in this country was auction. Actually, the primary route of selling anything in this country was auction. Livestock, machinery, land, property, all auction. What happened was auction decided what they wanted to do was they wanted to create a high street presence. Then they became specialists in the high street. They became agents for estate management. So it all kind of devolved away from what auctions were. And I know that takes us to a bit of a draconian past, but actually, in terms of the purity of how the law of the land works, it was all focused around the auction process. And I think when you step away from that, you actually things break down and it becomes a less perfect system. And auctions by far are not a perfect system. And when I mean simple, maybe it's not the best use of terminology, but the book, I hope, just highlights the simplicity of the auction. It takes you through the process so you understand it, because something's only simple once you understand it, right? A lot of people understand estate agents because there's 10 on every bloody high street. You cannot not understand what an estate agent does. But when it comes to auctions, auction transactions represent, on average, year by year, 2% of the property transactions that take place annually in this country. Over 30% of the property transactions that take place in this country take place off market. It's massive, which means Rightmove, Zoopla, and estate agents only account for about 68%. And obviously they've got a massive commodity and coverage of the market, but it's ridiculous when you think about 30% is direct to vendor or off market. They say the same thing about the job industry, isn't it? Only 10% of jobs listed on job finding sites are the jobs that are available. Everything else is recommendations and jobs promotions within and things like that. So it's very similar when it comes to auctions. I think the beauty of the auctions is its simplicity, right? At the end of the day, once you put your hand up and you've won that property, you've won that property. There's no gazumping, there's no gazundering. You get all of your information up front. You make an informed decision. Obviously, you do your own due diligence above and beyond the legal pack, but I think you're given a far better shake. I think a lot of people struggle with auctions because in the last 5 or 6 years, auctions have some auctions at least, not while you're recording will I name them, but some auctions at least have just turned into a disposal ground for dodgy property traders. And not all traders are dodgy, but there are some really bad eggs out there. And if anyone wants to know any company names that they should stay away from if they find them in a legal pack, you can contact me separately and I'll point you in the right direction. I don't think I could say them whilst being recorded. I think that would open me up to a couple of issues, but I would be more than happy to share in the future.
Sorry, at the very beginning, I did say on the housekeeping that we do record we do record this meeting for people who can't make it. So sorry, I should have said that to you.
Oh no, I don't mind that, but I mean the sensitive stuff. So I mean,
you'll be getting questions from us certainly, and probably others. I think that it's interesting about the 30% off market. I didn't realise it's quite that high actually, so that's really interesting. The 2% of transactions going through auction, I'm sort of not so surprised about. I suppose when you talk about simplicity with auctions, I was going to say there's like more transparency. Because the actual deal is the majority of the deals are done in the room, as they say. So it's actually live. So the whole gazundering, it's in the bidding is open, isn't it? So you immediately remove that. So in that respect, it's probably I think I'd argue it's a more open process.
Once you understand the rules and the definitions, you have a massive remit to do 1,000,001 different things in the auction, and actually that's pure opportunity. When you're dealing with estate agents, a lot of I was an estate agent. I've dealt with thousands of estate agents. I can tell you that a good 90% of estate agents that I know and have worked with or worked for are it's horrendous. I find it difficult to find a good estate agent with any kind of morality or ability to actually do something on level. I was looking at a property in, where the hell was I? I was in northwest London. I was near New Southgate, and I was looking at this asset, and basically I was approached by a solicitor that I know, and they said, look, these guys are about to be repossessed. They've got some savings, but they can't really deploy the savings because they're out of work because of COVID and all this and that. They just need to be rescued. So I went there because the solicitor recommended me. He said, look, the access is via the agent. I said, yeah, no problem at all. If all they're doing is opening the door, that's fine. By the time I finished that viewing, that agent had intimated to me on no less than 7 occasions that an envelope filled with a couple of red notes wouldn't go amiss to secure that asset. Now, I get confused in situations like that. And maybe it's because I've got some kind of twisted moral compass. So I don't know what it is, but I get confused when I hear that, because when I was an agent, I always thought if anyone offered me any money to give them the deal, I haven't made any money. I've just sold myself out. Because what happens then is the relationship that they have created with me is just something they can use to beat me over the head with every time they want another deal. And if I don't secure them the deal, they'll go tell your boss or whatever that you've taken $5,000 in an envelope or whatever the story is. And I always thought it just, for the longevity of the relationship, for doing stuff, it doesn't make sense. So when a lot of these training companies or property training companies, or when a lot of these people are like, oh, all you have to do is have a relationship with the agent, a lot of that translated basically means we give the agent a backhander to get us a good deal. And I don't think that's an appropriate way to do business. I think it's rather under the table, and it's lewd, and I don't think it's sustainable. At the auctions, there are far less opportunities to fetter the process. A lot of the sales are probates, repossessions, receivership sales, local authority sales, housing associations, charities. These are people that you cannot sway. And they go through auction because under their fiduciary duty to their stakeholders, shareholders, whoever it may be, they have to be seen to be getting an open value, a fair open value. And the auction still to this day determines market value for a property in that road. Doesn't matter if another property next door sold for more, it creates what they call a fair market value. So by all means, if you sell the property next door for 20 grand more, you've done well. But the sell price at auction is technically the value. Now, there are times when that is quite frayed and doesn't really work. And there are examples, many horrific examples of when auction goes wrong. But actually, if you operate within, it's the same thing with everything. If you operate within the lines of how something works, it's going to work perfectly. The moment you try to break it or bastardize it for your own purposes is where it starts to fall down. So, I mean, I've been in a couple of debates with people, and I don't think anyone has ever been able to persuade me that agency is better than auction. And that's all personal. I'm not telling you one is better than the other, but I'm talking from my personal perspective, from my strengths, from what I value. I value being able to find a deal, do the deal, and move on to the next deal. When you're going through an estate agent, you really do have to shovel through some shit to get there. And even then, when you get there, it can all fall down. And I haven't got the physical, emotional, or mental energy, not with a 1-year-old and a wife that's into horses. I've not got the time, effort, energy to deal with that kind of ridiculousness. It's not in my nature. But like I said, there's a lot of ways that auctions can go wrong. I've mentioned it's a limited information puzzle, so you have to be able to do your own independent due diligence. You have to look at each auction house as a separate entity, because although they all do the same thing, they all do it slightly differently, and the house rules rule. It's very much like gambling. You have to play the averages. Now, I will be looking at securing maybe 3 or 4 properties per auction cycle, and the chance of me securing all 3 or 4 it's happened once or twice, but I will try and walk away with one. So always have a backup. A lot has changed in auctions. Obviously, with COVID-19, everyone went online. Some of them are using just an eBay style bidding window, and some of them are using kind of a live stream where the auctioneer is still standing, because their egos won't cope with them sitting in a dark, quiet room for too long, where they're shouting out the numbers and they're doing the telephone proxy bids. I still prefer the one where the auctioneer is shouting. That may be slightly perverse, but I like a lot of what the auction day is it's theatre. It is actually casino. A lot of people don't see it like that, but actually it is. You walk into an auction, you're walking into a gambling environment. So just I would bear stuff like that in mind. Another question you've asked here is common mistakes of investors bidding in auctions. There is a couple of really, really tragic videos on YouTube. One of them that always sticks in mind, and I smile, but I felt so sorry for these 2 ladies. I think they were sisters, or maybe they weren't sisters or business partners, but there was a really close like tie, familial tie, that maybe sisters-in-law, something like that. And they were going to an auction, but before they went into an auction, they met this gentleman who's an auction specialist, who basically prepped them that when they go in the room, you know, stand to the side, do all of this stuff that people tell you to do, make eye contact with the auctioneer, make a gesture to know that he's going to bid. But what he didn't tell them was, you know, when you're doing this, make sure you talk to each other. So if you're ever going to an auction as a tandem, communication between the parties is vitally important, because what these ladies did was, when one of them was bidding, let's say it was like 180, the other lady, who wasn't looking at what her partner was doing, then bid 185. So for about £10,000, they bid each other up. There was no one else in the room. Now, here's where it gets tricky. I know a couple of auctioneers who will continue to take those bids and just think more for them. But a lot of auctioneers will say, are you two together? Do you know you're bidding against each other? There are some auctioneers that do that. Fortunately, I used to work for one. I spent 6 years working at Auction House London, and Andrew Benstock, I'm very biased, is probably one of the most entertaining, if not one of the best auctioneers I've ever watched. So their next auction's on the 9th of December, and they live stream that, so you can watch that on their website if you want to get a feel for an auction. I think they do live stream, Stratton's do live stream, and Savills. So for the London bunch, those are the three that do live stream. Everyone else does widget, which is basically just looking at the screen, which is not interesting at all. And he would normally say, and because other things that happen is, some people who are bidding at auction will actually, if it's one person, they will bid against themselves. So auctioneer will go, okay, 250, so that's with you, 250, anywhere else, 250, 255. And but because you're in a high stress situation, the guy's like, oh, 250, I'm going to win this, 250, puts his hand up. So an auctioneer may let that happen once, and then will say to you, you know, you're bidding against yourself. You know, you don't want to dissuade them, but at the same time, you don't want to encourage that kind of bidding attitude.
Would this be a good time to talk about sort of when an auctioneer takes bids, you know, what they call off the wall, or, you know, from actually take bids that actually aren't real? Is now
Yes.
good to talk about that?
It's always a good time to talk about that. This subject, Chris, you'd be surprised. I was on one of these Facebook property forums, and about 20 people were slating me to the ground, saying, this is illegal, this is fraud. And I'm like, no. You don't understand what is happening. When they say they're taking bids off the wall, so just to give everyone kind of a little bit of history, in like the 18th century, there is a law that is still valid today, which basically says that the auctioneer is to get the bidding started up to, but not including the reserve price, is able to manifest bids off the seller, the seller's agent, or a fitting. So a fitting, that's why they say take it off the chandelier. They're able to manifest bidding. Now, the truth behind this is that it has absolutely zero bearing on anything. That it has no negative effect for any investor or any seller. And let me explain why. The guide price at auction will be set at an attractive level, and the reserve price has to, under Advertising Standard Authority's rule, has to be within 10% of that guide price. For instance, keep the maths simple, because I'm quite a simple-minded person with maths. The guide is 250, the uppermost reserve is 275, the lower point reserve is 225, right? So within 10% of that guide price, above or below. I can tell you now that at least 95% of all of those reserves are guide and above. There's very few occasions when it's below. Although I say that, I know that one of the auctioneers at Allsops really likes to drop bidding below the guide and then run up from there. So I think probably some of his reserves are slightly low. So it all comes down to what suits the auctioneer best to get the best result for the client at the end of the day. So what the auctioneer is allowed to do, and maybe go into definitions. So the reserve price is the absolute minimum price at which the auctioneer can hammer the property at, can sell the property at. So what he is able to do is, if let's say the guide price is 250, human nature is we're still technically, you know, societal herd-ish animals, right? we're like that sheep. The once one sheep jumps over the cliff, you'll just watch them all go after each other. Okay. It's been a long time since I've done a psychology degree, but there is an element of that. So what the auctioneer does is, when he starts the bidding, we call it sitting on their hands, because they're scared. They don't know what they're looking for. They don't know how to bid. They don't know what price they should go to, etc., etc. So the auctioneer will just make it easy for them to start the bidding. Now, if he starts at 250 and he's making bids up to maybe 250 to 500, the chances of him being able to sell the property at that level is minuscule. So if you come in at 253, your chances of buying that property at 253 are minuscule, because it's probably at that point still quite below the reserve. Now, what he can do, or she, because there are some really very gifted female auctioneers. One lady in particular, Sarah from Auction House Lovitz in Coventry. She's got a brilliant auctioning style. There's not that many female auctioneers, and I think there should be more. But by and large, the auctioneer in the example will be, he will then continue to bid against you. He cannot force you to the reserve point or over. He can only bid an increment or two below that point. So if you decide to bid and you hit reserve, the worst case scenario is that you'll be buying that property at the reserve price. Now, people get upset with this, like, oh, well, that's a manipulation, it's this, that, and the other. It isn't. It's a facilitation, because if you don't get to that reserve price, you're not winning a property. And you should have done your numbers beforehand and know that actually this price, maybe 276 was your maximum price. And if you win it at 275, winner, everyone's happy. So, and it's something that a lot of people get upset with, but the truth of the matter is, all it is there for is to facilitate the smooth running and bidding of the auction.
Okay. Can I just challenge you on a point, though?
Yeah.
I don't understand it. The only thing I'd say is that if an auction is a good way to determine the market value of a property, in some respects, the auctioneer running through this process of taking it up to just close to the reserve, but not beyond it, is then poisoning that sort of market guy. So do you see what I mean? That if the market is saying, well, it's not at the reserve anyway, in some respects, the auctioneer could actually be artificially inflating what the market actually is prepared to pay. But, just sort of in a case of where they've overestimated the value. That's the only challenge I would put to you, Jay.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant point. I will counter with, has anyone bought anything in an investment capacity from Foxton's estate agents? The answer is no, because they overinflate the value of the property to make it seem like it's a premium. And you're always, if I was selling a house, I sold the building we're in now, that sold at auction in September. It should be completing in a week's time, with any luck, because I bought a house further out. But if I was selling, I'd be selling through an agent who is overinflating the price. Bear in mind, all estate agents do this. They put the guide out or offers in excess of, or this, that, and the other, because they're expecting someone to come in lower. The auction works in the opposite way. It starts here and hopes to get here, and you're kind of hoping that you're in and around the same kind of margin. Now, your point about the auctioneer bidding, it is very rare that the auctioneer will be bidding just one human being up to that reserve point. What normally happens is, and it's again the sheep example, not saying anyone here is sheep, but the sheep example is, once someone can see that someone else in the room is bidding, and they were planning on bidding anyway, but they didn't want to be the first. That there is that real fear. No one wants to jump first. So what the auctioneer does is he encourages you to just do what you were planning on doing anyway. That's all it is. It's a facilitation. And it's a very standard practice. And the majority of properties that sell at auction will normally be selling above the reserve anyway, at which point the facilitation at the early stage has no impact on that upper sell point. All it does is it makes sure that instead of people coming there and not bidding, it means that they don't walk. It means that they're not walking away with nothing, and it means that the seller is getting a sale. it just facilitates. It really is just a function of running an auction rather than having any kind of nefarious kind of connotations that some people kind of attribute to it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Yeah, you understand the process. It's just that earlier we were talking about transparency, and I suppose in some respects that's not making it transparent, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. In actual fact, that's a good question. I wonder how much an auctioneer actually uses that tactic, if you like. I mean, have you got any idea?
It's when I worked for Auction House London, we'd basically get to the auction at about 9 o'clock in the morning, 3 hours before the auction starts. We don't normally eat or drink or finish anything until 5 or 6 o'clock. So no toilet breaks, no lunch, nothing. It's a marathon of a day, but it's pure property porn. Like if you love a bit of property, going to a proper old school auction room is an absolute delight. There's a part of me that wants them to come back, but not too soon. But and after the auction, when we're sitting down having dinner and we're running through, the sales success rates that we have to send off to EIG and all that stuff, the auctioneer will go, okay, well, this one was really hard. There was only 2 people, so I had to. And we're talking less than in a 120 lot catalogue, less than 10% would require that kind of work doing to it.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Thanks.
The transparency here is, I mean, people always think that when they learn about this bidding off the wall, that they've kind of uncovered some kind of secret Illuminati kind of property plot, and it starts getting all kind of Bilderberg and lizards run the country. But it's not the case at all. You pick up any auction catalogue, in that catalogue somewhere, it will state that is what the auctioneer does. And in every single contract signed between the auctioneer and the seller, it stipulates that the auctioneer reserves the right to encourage bidding in the first instance to try and get the property to sell above reserve. So it's just part and parcel of how that works. And I still think it's fairer than looking at something on the market with an agent where they've overpriced it or overvalued it to get you to overpay. You start lower, and with the exclusion of that little injection of momentum to get people engaged and bidding and going through it, that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't think anything is transparent, but I think auctions are as opaque as you're going to get. Yes. And I think there's so much that needs to change with auctions, with estate agency and things like that. But there's a lot of compliance that have come in recently, and I think that's going to have a really positive effect on the industry. So I'm all for that, 100%.
Okay, I think the key point is that the auctioneer isn't allowing anyone to overpay because they can't take their bidding up beyond the reserve anyway. So you couldn't have bought it at a lower price anyway. So that is the sort of safeguard for me. So that's the simple sort of way to look at it. Jay, would now be a good time to look at the questions in the chat? Is that a good point, or do you want to come on to them later?
Yeah, no, let's have a look. I hadn't seen. Here we go.
There's a couple from Emma. I can read them out if you want.
I'm not seeing any questions. I've just seen Sam leaving, and then that's it.
Oh, sorry. No, sorry. It's just direct to me. Sorry.
Okay.
So I'll let you choose whether you want to answer or not. So the question is, do you think that complicated / risky properties end up being auctioned? And I think there's a follow-up that says, can the bidding environment drive a price above the market price? So it's 2 questions. One, do you think that complicated, risky properties end up being auctioned? Should we try that one first?
So in the first instance, I think there is a sweet spot type of quality of asset rather than asset class, type of asset, quality of asset that does really very well at auction. Once it gets too complicated, I think you're alienating a lot of buyers, because actually, if you're talking about, there was an auction last month, and I was looking at a hotel in Luton, 1 million, and ground floor had commercial, then hotel on three or four floors above, but it was a flat roof. And I was thinking, well, I know someone who's doing these hotel pods, and they could get planning and put the pods up, but obviously you wouldn't be able to do that under PD because it's within 3 kilometers of an airport, an airfield. So you'd have to go for full planning. Even then I thought this looks like a really very good deal. When I spoke to the person, they said, look, when you're looking at buying a hotel, and I would imagine maybe this, to a certain element, maybe the same kind of thing with like small scale service accommodation. You're not buying it under the same terms you'd be buying a fixed AST or even an HMO, which is separated into X number of ASTs within a building. You need to be looking at, what's your vacancy. I mean, you guys will know so much more about the service accommodation side of things, in terms of how to value it and wanting to see what the last year's trading was, how many times you had to clean it, was it vandal, all those kind of things. I don't believe it's practical or practicable to sell an asset like that at auction, because the level of due diligence is greater. Other things that I've seen not do well at auction is large development sites, unless the people who are interested in that development site have already been doing due diligence on it for a couple of months, and the vendors put it into auction to get them to actually do something. That happens, and they tend to do quite well. But bringing something like that, to the market cold into auction, they really do struggle. The other type of asset I see struggle with is, and this became popular recently, especially with the stamp duty changes. People were selling not the asset, but the company that owned the asset, right? So you were buying 100% shares in X, Y, and Z Limited, which owned 127 Acacia Avenue or whatever it is. And actually, that for me is probably one of the riskier, more difficult types of property transactions you can do, because you're not just valuing the property, you need to be looking at the company. What is its what VAT liabilities does it have? What creditors and debitors are there? What you need warranties and all, and it takes an absolute lifetime to do the due diligence on something like that. I've seen a couple of properties that have been put in auction which are done via option. Now, option does work at auction, but not when you disclose that you're selling it via an option, because it creates too much hassle for a buyer. If you kind of work it as an assisted sale or a trade, it's quicker and it's easier. So those type of properties tend not to do very well. Okay. Myself and business partner, we've kind of carved a bit of a niche for ourselves at auctions. We are very, very good at selling HMOs at auction. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I'm not a fan of HMOs as an asset class, because there's too many residential tenants, and it's not for me. But it's for a lot of other people, right? It's income on steroids. I get all the positives. It's a great asset. What I worry about with HMOs is that they're really, really, really very difficult to value, and I think banks find them difficult to value. A lot of them trying to do, are we valuing it on bricks and mortar value? In which case, a property in Burnley that's producing £30,000 is probably only worth 120, right? Do we do a hybrid where we're valuing it on its bricks and mortar value and its income generation on a yield basis? And then there are those who just take a pure commercial view. Now, when you're selling at auction, the problem that you have is you've got to encourage another HMO investor to go, right, I'm going to inherit this property and potentially all of the pain in the arse tenants that are in those properties, right? Because it's an HMO, there's always one pain in the arse tenant. No matter what you do, you're going to come up with the crazy person who either, nicks stuff out of the fridge, or, smokes weed in the back garden, or whatever it is, or the delightful ladies upstairs who, rent out the rooms as knocking shots. I've heard every flavor of horrific story when it comes to HMOs. But whatever it is, I never know how an investor is valuing an HMO. I like to think, in my naivety, because it's what I would do, is I would first find out what the bricks and mortar value of the property is. Then I would do a valuation on pure commercial level. What yield am I happy to end up with netted? And then I'd probably try and find a figure in between to kind of reduce risk. And those are very difficult properties to sell at auction. We tend to do quite well, and I don't know what our winning formula is, but we tend to do quite well with those. But a lot of other auctioneers tend to struggle. We sold a 16-bed HMO and a 24-bed HMO. These are beasts of property. It's a good couple of thousand square foot knocking about there. And they're very difficult to sell in the open market. So in terms of difficult properties to sell, those are the ones I would state are difficult. The easy properties to sell, like the ultra easy ones, are the ones that I recommend people stay away from. Do not, under any circumstances, that's for everyone here today and everyone who's recorded and listened to it later, do not buy shitty bits of land in the arse crack of nowhere with no access to a main road. don't do it. Even if you think I'm only paying 10 grand for it, what's the worst that could happen? The worst has already happened. You pay 10 grand for something that isn't worth £10.50. And the problem with those kind of assets are, even if you were to get planning permission, I know a guy who combated me on this one. It was a property in Surrey, as it in Orkley, something like that. It's a really lovely area. It's a nice village. He managed to get planning. I was like, okay, so when are you going to build it out? He said, well, I can't build it out yet. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to perceive that these three things are your main issues. So I told him the first issue is you can't build it out until all of those plots in that field are sold off. Am I right? He said, yeah, you're right. And there are no amenities onto the site. So no water, no electric, no internet, no nothing. You get all your utilities entered onto the site. And there's no roads. So what you're basically saying is, here's a big, massive field, and here's your tiny 3-bedroom little house with a garden and a fence. And no. Don't do that. Those are ridiculous. And in a similar kind of vein, there are certain properties. If you're a London investor, if you're an investor that's from anywhere below the Watford Gap, which I'm assuming most of us are, if you're looking at properties in places like Hull, County Durham, like Peterlee, places like that, your expectation of what a rental property should look like is not the reality of what you're going to find up there. Yeah. So when you're buying a 3-bedroom house let on an LHA AST tenant producing £6,000 per annum, and you're paying £25,000 for it, you're thinking that's an unbelievable yield. When you realise that actually all of those tenants are on some form of benefits, because Margaret Thatcher decided to destroy the coal mining industry a couple of years ago, and no one's actually gone back to work really since. And there's a big methamphetamine issue in the area. And some people who are not in those kind of social, suffer from those social issues in those areas. What they do is you can't really tell, except for sometimes you'll see the ones that have got the windows and the doors boarded up. And you think, wow, those must be really bad. Actually, those are the nicest properties. The reason why they board up those windows is so that the crackheads at 3 o'clock in the morning can't throw a bottle of whatever through the window. Those kind of areas. So you have to be really very careful just by saying this is a 3-bedroom house, this is a yield. You have to do your due diligence, and you find a lot of these kind of assets in areas that you may not be familiar with that look like unbelievable deals. You kind of have to really dig behind that. There was a documentary on E4 a couple of years ago talking about I think they called it, what do they call it? Duke Street or something like that, which is like one of the main roads in County Durham or Peterlee, where there's like a lot of these issues, and they highlighted this as well. So those are the kind of assets to be weary of in my view. So, Chris, what was the second part of the question?
So it was about thanks for that. Thanks for that, Jay. I think it shows the depth of your knowledge with some of what you're talking about here. So that's really, really interesting. So thank you for that. The second part was, can the bidding environment drive a price above the market price?
That's a brilliant question. And I have a very, very recent example of this. Let me just have a quick look. I'm just going to wander away for a second whilst I try and find this example. Search auctions. I should be able to share the screen on this one. Auctions.
I've just found that there's a pause button on the recording. So if you did want to share anything, I can always pause the recording, Jay.
Okay, so let's just not out. It was residential. It was past month. Let's see if this comes up. Okay, may have to go the long way around. Just give me 2 seconds and just bear with me while I find this asset, because it does. It's a really kind of, that's a good question, and I'll just before I show you this, I'm going to preface it with this is an absolute rarity, and people don't think it's an absolute rarity. So let's just
okay. What I'll do after this bit, okay, is I'll open it up if anyone's got any questions. So I'm just warming people up that after we've done this, I'll open it up for any questions that people have got.
So can everyone see my screen? Can you guys see my screen?
I can see Northolt, Middlesex.
Yep. So there you go. So this was lot number 13 at the auction house, London auction, in October. They don't run a November auction. Right? This was October. If we won't be able to see, so view details as PDF. This is important. So when you see something that's sold and you think, I can't figure out the value, the guide price on this, if you can see, that was 475.
Right.
Can everyone see that bit?
Yeah.
This is a end of terrace house, vacant 3-bed. Now, what's interesting about this is all that's happened, and I know a bit more about the story than probably I should, but what's happened here is that someone has convinced Mr. and Mrs. Smith here to sell them their property on a subject to planning deal. They've taken an option. All they've then done is they've just submitted the planning. That's all this is. So from 475 to 926, there's no planning granted. There is literally just an application. That's it. Wow. Sheer hope value.
Wow.
Okay. The only thing that's been applied and approved for was the was for them to, under lawful development, put the front and rear dormers in. That's it. Now, we run a live auction commentary of Auction House London every month, and we've been doing that since I think July. And it got to lot number 13. We thought, oh, you know, Northolt's actually not a bad area. It's got good transport. It's close to airports, la di da da. Yeah. And you can see here this massive extra plot on the side. So if you were seeing this on an estate agent, you'd think, I'll buy that and see if I can do a little bit of something with this side plot. Natural, right? But what's happened here is that the bidding went to 926. Now, this 3-bedroom house, once converted into a 4-bedroom house and completely done up to 9s, is probably worth about 550, maybe a bit more. There is no planning granted for this side plot here. That planning could be refused for any number of reasons, and who knows, maybe it would be granted. But even if it was granted, you'd still have to build it out, and it would only then still be worth about 550. So you're in at 926. You've got all your fees, you've got everything else that you're dealing with. You then have to put the dormers and extension and refurb the first house. Then you have to build the second one. How many people here think there's any money left in that deal?
No, but
yeah, not a drop, right? You'd probably have to own it for 30 years on a very, very high rental return to kind of, you know, cover your ass on it. And even then, I think that's hopeful thinking. So this is one of the very, very obscure circumstances where it just goes absolutely insane. This was about 30 minutes worth of bidding.
Wow.
Put that into perspective, that auction was about 5.5 hours. So this was a big chunk of that auction. And things like this happen, but I would say it happens in less than like 3 to 5% of the property transactions in the year. Everything else, either, you know, if you get lucky, you can get it well below market value, but the rest seems to settle anywhere between 5 or 10% in and around perceived market value. Some people tend to pay a little bit more if they're motivated. You know, for instance, if you owned not the one there, but if you owned the one next to it, if you owned the one on the right hand side and you were buying the one on the left hand side, and you're trying to buy one on the further left hand, build one on the further left hand side, then actually by having all three, there's you know, a value, an economy of value there, because you could maybe knock them all through and turn it into a super duper hyper beam kind of HMO of some description, or you know, there are other things that you can do, I'm sure, but in reality that's not the case here. And I'm not picking on Auction House London because I used to work there. I've got a lot of respect for the guys, and they can't regulate 3 or 4 people. And we were watching it. 4 people were fighting us out to about 915,000, and then 2 people took it that extra 16, the extra 11. Sorry.
That was going to be my point, really, Jay, was that it wasn't just one person who thought it was worth that much money. There was more than one to even drive the price up to that point. So what is it that made that price so much? What do you think it was the reason why that property went for so much money?
Well, I'd like to think that a lot of it was down to the hope value and the fact that someone hadn't done their numbers. But the reality of it really is that nobody wants to lose. Someone got emotional about it, or several people got emotional about it. They had it in their head that they were walking away with that property, and then it becomes a grudge match where they're not actually thinking about the value of the property. They're thinking about, oh, how dare you keep bidding against me? I'm taking this. Then it becomes personal. You cannot even think about approaching an auction if you have any of that in the back of your mind. If you're not prepared to look at that and go, well, they paid $5,000 more than me, give them a round of applause and walk out happy, you're in the wrong environment. I strongly advise that's one of the things I used to advise people is the traffic light system. So I would create a three price points for me to, when I'm looking at buying something at auction. Green. If I can buy it at green, I'm going to take myself out for a lovely steak dinner. I've done very well if I purchase that at my green value. Indigo or orange, the orange one in the middle. Okay, I've got myself a good deal. I'm still happy with it. I've got a couple of exits, a couple of ways to add value. This is still a good deal. Red is like, okay, I'm stretching myself. I shouldn't go above this point. And the reason I recommend having those 3 points is most people go to the auction and say, this is my maximum bid. And they think they're being really very clever, but all you're doing is you're creating a lot of internal social, psychological pressure. And you'll be surprised how quickly that breaks, especially when there are other people bidding, there's distractions, or the worst thing, which is nowadays, because there are no room auctions, is all you have to do is click a button. There you go. That's it. That's 5,000. That's another 5,000. 15, 20, 25, 30. And all of a sudden, because it's something so insignificant as a click, or what's even more dangerous is going into any shop anywhere and just going beep. That's £30 on a shop. You know what I mean? With the removal of the tangibility of the money, everything feels kind of fake and it's not real. And I think people no one really kind of picks up on that. And I think there's probably an element of all 3 points there. In reality, with that property, what happened was there were 4 idiots who refused to lose. And all that happened is that one of them, I guarantee, and here's the thing, I was doing some maths, which is not my strongest point, and it takes me a little bit of a while to get to it. But I was doing some maths, and I called up a business partner. I said, they only have one option. He said, what's the option? I said, it's cheaper for them to lose their £92,600 deposit. It's cheaper.
Wow. It was that bad.
It's cheaper. It was that bad. Walk away. Yeah. It would that bad. Walk away. The problem is, if that vendor then has to resell that property, let's say they only get 600,000 for it, which is there or thereabouts good value for doing a build out at that kind of level, they will be liable for the difference between the 926 and the 600. It's called detrimental reliance of a contract. So not only could they lose that 96 grand, but they could also be pursued for 326 grand on top.
Wow. Yeah.
So don't take auctions lightly. You really have to be professional. You have to be disciplined. You have to give yourselves multiple opportunities to kind of walk away from it, knowing that actually there's another property another day. There's always another property.
Okay. Yeah. So it's the whole danger of being run on emotion, really, which is exactly what seems to have happened there.
And that danger, that's all from the buyer. The auction has got all they can say is here's the next bid, or we're inviting the next bid. Everything else is down to you and your own mental state and capacity. So you just have to be aware of that. Well, they
wouldn't be doing their job properly if they didn't take those bids and didn't try and get the maximum price anyway. So yeah. I don't think it's with the auction. It's absolutely not with the auction house. Was there anything else you want to say on that, Jay, or shall I see if anyone's got any questions?
Well, you did ask a question, and it does show that you've read the book because it's one of the very last chapters, unless you've conned me and all you did was read the intro and the last chapter, and I'm sure there's people that have done that. They've missed out on value in there. I've put 18 years worth of kit into that book.
I know what the question is. It's a brilliant question, obviously, because it's mine, but I was just going to see if anybody else had any questions. That was all before you got into that, Jay. That was all.
Yes, we'll leave that question as the crescendo.
Okay. So I'll just open it up to anybody. If anyone's got any questions, if you want to come off your mic, we've got Jay on the call. He's got fantastic knowledge, as is proved already. Has anyone got a question? I must admit, I could be here for several hours asking you questions, actually, Jay. So I have to try and restrain myself. I don't think anyone's got any questions. Okay. So
I've got a question.
Oh, okay. Hi,
Hello, don't put my video back on. Hi, Jay. Good to see you again. I've been looking more and more at the EIG alerts and stuff recently, and really I'm looking for a sort of deal based on the guide prices, and I'm quite happy to add value. What would you say? What tips would you give me in terms of finding something that is worth going to the room on, whether commercial or residential? I'm comfortable with either.
My first tip is one that no one is going to like to hear, and sometimes this works well with people, sometimes it doesn't. It's a bit of Marmite. My first tip to you is ignore the price on that piece of paper. Whatever that guide price says, it's pure imagination. That price has no reflection on true market value. That price is marketing. That price is telling you something that isn't real.
Isn't it supposed to be within 20% of the?
It's supposed to be within 10% of the reserve, but the reserve is below is at a reduced value. It's no reflection on market value. The guide and reserve, no reflection on the value of the property whatsoever. This is the mistake that almost every single person makes, and this is not. I'm not just picking on auctions here. At estate agencies, the price is meaningless. I used the example of Foxtons. I mean, they got a lot of money; they could sue me. But I used the example. I also said that I would use them to sell property. Obviously, it works, But the price is it's imaginary. RICS Red Book valuations, pluck that in there. I tell you what, the real thing is. What you're willing to pay is what that property is worth to you. Every property is a brilliant deal. Every single property, no matter what the price is, every single property is an absolute stonking deal to the right person. If you're not the right person, it's not a good deal at any price. So the trick here is have a look at the address, have a look at what it is. I mean, this is sometimes I hate Allsops and Savills, and sometimes I love them, because in their catalogues, they don't put the guide and reserve prices on those property sheets. And it forces you to do the due diligence, say, okay, let's see if anything's sold in the area recently. Let me do my due diligence and find out what I think it's worth. Let me take into consideration costs and fees and stamp and all these other things, and then let me figure out what I'm willing to pay for it. The number that you see on that catalogue page is influencing you.
Yeah. It's
removing you from making the right kind of bid because you're prejudiced now. You see that 425 on that Northolt property, you're thinking, oh, if I can get it close to that, it's a really good deal. Well, of course it's a really good deal. That property, that's an absolutely amazing deal. Of course it is, but it's not real. What's real is what you're willing to pay for it. And I know we could talk about going to a shop and looking at a bottle of water and seeing one bottle for £1, one bottle for £1.29, one bottle of Voss for £6.50. The truth is, if you're willing to pay £6.50 for a bottle of exactly the same water, maybe with a little bit more zinc, maybe with a little bit more potassium, but exactly the same water, then you're going to do that. But it doesn't mean that you're getting more value for that one than you are for the other. The true evaluation of a property is what you're willing to pay for it. And that's really very important. I made a really kind of offhand comment towards the beginning of the call where I said, if you're buying a 3-bedroom house, you may be buying it because you want to, you know, buy, refurbish, rent, refinance, you know, the that everyone talks about. That may be you, but the person sitting next to you in the auction is thinking, I can turn that 3-bed into a 5-bed HMO. And at the moment, I'm looking at escalating my value because they will be valuing it based on the commercial rate, which is going to be easily 100 grand more than what you're willing to pay for it. Have they overpaid? No, they haven't overpaid. They paid what is suitable for them and what they do, what their value add opportunity is, what their investment strategy is. They've paid equivalent value for something based on what they're going to do with it. Does that make sense? I've got a little bit ethereal here, but do you see what I mean?
No, I do. I totally understand. Yeah.
Yeah, it's normally a stark statement for me to make. A lot of people either look really cross-eyed at me or just start laughing at me. But the truth of the matter is, if you can think of it the way that I've said that to you, that you're going to open up a lot more opportunities because you're going to be valuing the property before you look at the price.
Yeah.
And actually, that saves you so much time, because you may be thinking, oh, I'm really interested in property, I'm going to try and get it close to the guide price. You're going to go to auction, someone's going to pay 50 grand above the guide price. You've wasted your time.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at the imaginary number. You need to find out the number that fits your strategy, your exit, your purposes, and then you have to base your decisions and your ability to buy on that, not on what someone else has told you to look at. It's magicians, it's misdirection, that's all it is. And I've already said, and every auctioneer that you talk to, the guide price is designed to attract people to come and bid for it. Yeah, the reserve has to be within 10% of that, but doesn't mean those two figures are anywhere near what the property's worth or what it could be worth or what it should be worth. That's for estate agents to mess up by overcharging for property, etc. There is the truth is you can't treat auctions like that, and you can't treat estate agency like that, private treaty. If you went to an estate agent, you said, oh, actually, you know, you sold one around the corner for 275 last week. Why is this one up for 305? Oh, well, there's good demand in the area, so we thought we'd put the prices up. That's you will hear that. Doesn't mean you should be paying 305. Doesn't mean you should be paying 275, because the world last week is not the world this week.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you'll be. It's an uncomfortable way to put things, but you'll be surprised actually how much your approach to how to deal with auctions and even estate agents. I always talk about auctions as being a really good marketplace, but the reality of it is auctions have taught me how to assess a deal really very quickly, how to value it, how to make an offer, and how to exchange and complete quickly. These are all skills that you can take to private treaty and beat any competition, because you're working to auction timelines, which are, you know, at least a third of private treaty timelines. Do you see what I mean? So when I do decide to go private treaty, when I can be asked to be screwed around for a couple of months, the chances are, if I'm not being screwed around, I can get a deal really very quickly. And at the moment, we're looking at buying a small portfolio in the Surrey kind of Essexy bordery bit there, looking at 4 properties, and it's all going to sealed bids, which I don't like, because it's clearly not a fair way to kind of deal with things. Because even when I sell things through estate agents, I want the estate agent to have 2 or 3 people that he's making fight against each other to get the money up, right? That's your ideal when you're selling in any way, in any capacity. Anything you're selling, you want to get the value. And when you're buying, you want to get the value. The problem is the value points are at 2 different levels. Yeah. So I would just don't focus on the prices that are put in estate agents' windows or are put in auction catalogues, because it's either designed to get you to look at the property, but it doesn't mean it's a reality. And if you're basing your numbers based on what the guide prices are, you're very much unlikely to be buying many, if any, properties at auction, because you're basing your ability to buy on sheer imagination. I mean, there are calculations that go into it, but actually in terms of what is real and what is actionable, they're 2 things that are very, very far apart from each other.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, does that answer your question? Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I am happy.
Although it's going to be work for you in terms of it's like the buyer actually doing all the due diligence to determine the value that they see in the property and where they were happy to bid for. I think that's what you're saying, Jay.
Yeah.
I've had another question on the chat sent to me, which is, after the success of programs like Homes Under the Hammer and such an awareness around auctions, are there still bargains to be had? That's a good question for this forum.
Well, there are, and you know, I'm assuming that we're all investors of one sort or another, either landlords or developers or traders or property people.
That's right.
So we represent an absolute minuscule amount of people compared to the general population of the country. You have to ask yourself, why is that? Well, the chances are we're probably a little bit insane. We're brave for the most part, because you have to be. It's having 7 or 8 properties and being responsible for people's homes and where they live and the quality of their living and dealing with money and banking. These are all scary things. It's not normal. It's not normal is you have a family home and you live there. What we do is abnormal, right? And we're a very, very small group of people. If you piled us all in together, we represent like next to nothing, which is why a lot of these landlord changes and stuff in government level it goes untested, because we are an absolute minority in the country compared to normal people who are just homeowners or renters, right? And you have to ask yourself, if 10 million people are watching Homes Under the Hammer every week, why aren't 10 million people going to the auction? So I guarantee you, if 10 million people were going to the auction, people would find ways to sell their property at auction, because that's where the dominant market would be. The fact of the matter is, it's a supply and demand situation. The auctions are supplying a demand. If there was more of a demand, so more people that, have a go heroes that watched Homes Under the Hammer turn up, there would be more properties, or they would be taking up a larger proportion of the annual property transactions in the country. And the truth of the matter is, auctions are scary. Property investing is scary. There's no hiding it. A lot of people do it because they want to better their lives and enrichment, or for legacy or for wealth creation. Whichever one you tick the box, it's fine. But there are a lot of people that don't. And I'm a big fan of grand designs. I'm a big fan of grand designs. But I would be, you've got to be off your tip. You've got to be nuts to be going and building something from the ground up. That's a personal opinion. A lot of my friends are developers, and I look at them like, you people are crazy, absolutely crazy. Everything can go wrong. I will buy something that exists. I'm not going to buy a patch of ground and see if I can build a Sistine Chapel on it. You've got to be nuts. But that's personally me. And 98% of the people in this country agree with me. You've got to be absolutely nuts. And that's why you get the odd person, or auctions. I think about 2016, 2017 was real height of the market, and auctions started getting what we call end user stock coming in. The Mr. and Mrs. Smiths who are looking to buy their first home, and there's obviously a 10% discount. They're looking at number 18 Edgar Avenue, and you've got number 15 Edgar Avenue. Number 18 is with the agent at 220. Number 15 is with you at 160. They're going to come to the auction. Doesn't mean they're going to win it. They're the ones that come in and are absolutely shocked and appalled and spend the whole time sitting on their hands, not knowing what they're doing. So the truth of the matter is, it's very difficult. It makes for good TV. I mean, it's a terrible program. I mean, if you wanted to get into property, you would not look at Homes and Hammer and think, that's great. Bought this property in whole for 30 grand. I spent 7 on it, and now it's worth 60. Every single one of us in this room will call bullshit on that. Every single one. Your legals, your stamp, your overrun, everything, the time it took to do that, your finance costs, none of that is put into a spread. When they say, oh, I've done this, and you think, oh, that's a brilliant deal, that represents a 20%, it does not. And that's the truth of things, because when people actually do any real due diligence, the reality hits them, and then the fear hits them. And there are a lot of people who don't want it badly enough. I mean, we're all crazy. You've got to be absolutely off the reservation to be doing what we do. But what we do is we provide a really good service, and this was all kind of the catalyst to this was Maggie Thatcher selling off a whole bunch of council homes in the 80s, right? And then you actually needed landlords, you needed people buying more properties because, and this is what people forget, we're in a housing shortage crisis. COVID has taken over that conversation, Brexit's taken over that conversation. Our population is not sustainable with the housing stock we have available at the moment, which is why HMOs are such a really good asset class to have, because you're actually solving part of a problem. And obviously they've changed the use classes on planning because they want to make it easier for people to build on existing structures rather than taking away our beautiful greenery or whatever most people complain about these days. And that's the reality of the situation. There's a housing shortage. And so we're needed, but in reality, 98%, well, I'll talk about developers, a good 80% of the population will look at what we do and think, nope. If they look at the reality, because if you take away what all of these marketing companies tell you, I call them marketing companies because they're not property educators, they're marketers, learn how to do rent-to-rent service accommodation with no money down on an option, right? These are not reality things. These are all kind of, this is just to get your money in. The truth of it is actually, if you're going to be doing property properly and scalable and manageable and creating long-term wealth, you need an element of ownership. You need a way to add value. You need a way of growth. And truth is, these control documents, they don't last forever. And it's difficult to value them. So what I would recommend, I've gone off on a complete tangent, which is not unusual for me.
No, the question was about, are there still bargains to be had in the auction?
Yes, in October last year, myself, business partner, and Rod Turner, you may or may not know Rod, he's probably more famous than I am. He's got the Rodcast, which talks about property and other kind of assets. It's a really good podcast. Yeah. We went to auction. It was the Harman Healy auction. We bought 4 workshops in Tooting, the Mitcham Tooting border, for £212,000, including all of our fees, so stamp, finance, legals, everything. We spent £230,000 on this property. We sold it in June this year for £650,000.
Yeah, so that was a fantastic deal, and I suppose.
But those aren't rarities.
They're not.
No, they're not rarities. The guy who bought the other set, he paid 10 grand more than us because I think that his units were producing more income. But he's selling it for 575, and he was buying it cash. We were looking at something a couple of auctions ago, and we thought, well, we'd probably pay up to 330 for it, and that would be a bargain. And someone paid like 335, which is, the difference of the £5,000 in the long term isn't that bad. And they've already added the value on that. That was about 2 or 3 months ago. And that's going back on the market, and they're probably going to make 300 grand off the back of it. Not quite doubling their money, but quite enough. So if you know what you're doing, you know what you're looking for, there are bargains. There are that's what the auctions are good for. There are things that kind of slow that down. So you've got some of the dodgy sellers putting ridiculous fees in legal packs, or not owning the titles yet and then doing it on assignment, things like that. Really difficult stuff. But if you know what you're looking for, you can avoid a lot of that. There are bargains there. The guy who bought that property in Northolt definitely didn't get a bargain. If anything, he's probably impoverished himself for a couple of years. But outside of those rarities, there are deals there. But it all comes down to what you're going to do with the property. Every property is a deal if you're at the right price and you're the right person for it. Because we bought those properties, and all we did was we got permitted development to turn them into 4 Muse houses. That's all we did.
So you had a backup plan that you could. I think there was rent, from my memory of your deal. There was income already anyway. So that
we bought it on 7.5%, which for that area was a really good deal. The backup was if we didn't get the PD, we'd go for full planning. the leases that we had on those units were coming up in a year anyway, so we had plenty of time to go through the planning route. We had Rod on board, who is a developer who would be able to execute the development if we needed to. But we were on board because, you know, we bought it from auction and we sold it into auction. We were out within 8 months. But, you know, and the person who bought it from us, this is the real kicker, went in for second stage planning, got front and rear dormers, so has now doubled the square footage of each unit, and is probably going to build out 4 phenomenal looking use houses in a nice residential road. And that's a beautiful deal, not just because we did really well, but the guy who's bought it from us has gone, right, that's good groundwork. I'm now going to add more value and then develop out.
Yeah.
You know, and those deals aren't that rare. I know quite a few people who trade at auction on a regular basis, and these are fairly wealthy people. But they always they take the broken property, they do something in the middle to help solve that problem, and then they put it into auction. Because they've made it mortgageable, or because they've solved a simple legal issue that a lot of people wouldn't know how to solve, because they've done X, Y, and Z, it then becomes an asset which is far more widely purchasable, rather than it just being one of 7 or 8 people who would A, know about the property, and B, be able to buy it and fix the problem. Okay. So there are still deals out there. You just need to be really very careful.
Okay. That's fantastic. So I would recommend your book. I'd recommend your book to the audience. Which is
if anyone thinks I'm making millions of pounds out of it, actually because we split the profits equally, I make 75p per copy. So if anyone thinks that you know, you're supporting my lifestyle, you're really not. But Piotr, who I co-wrote the book with, he was a buying agent, and he's been specializing in auctions for 8 years, almost now 10 years, and we just put everything in there. There's no upsell. It's, if you haven't read it, I'm very biased. It's a really good book.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I'd highly recommend it, Jay. So there's one last question. So and I'm going to leave this to you. You can either answer the question that I've already put to you, or if you think there's something that you wanted to talk about, or you think would be of more interest to the audience, then go for that. So I'm happy to leave it to you. Either if you've missed something, or want to talk about something, then do that. If not, you could cover my last question. So it's completely up to you, Jay.
I was quite lucky that Ura asked the question about the value, because that's one I'm always ready to rant about. So I'm happy to go with your question. I don't think I've missed out too much.
Okay, good.
So the question was, do you want to announce, or what was it here?
I know it's about underwriting, but it's just about how I think it's a really interesting and not particularly well understood aspect of auction. I just thought it'd be interesting for people. That was all. Okay.
It is. It's normally I get there's quite a prolific trader at auction that every time I talk about underwriting, I get what's very, very close to a death threat in my inbox. It absolutely hates me telling people about underwriting.
Oh, right. Okay.
The truth of the matter is, underwriting is an absolutely beautiful concept as long as you're not greedy. So that reduces its applicableness by quite a degree. On top of it working perfectly, if you're not greedy, there are only a handful of auctioneers that offer underwriting to the average Joe, including myself. There are some auctioneers who will only offer underwriting to clients who sell a minimum of X number of properties through them every month. So they use it as the way to thank those clients for providing them with so much stock, etc., etc. I'm not a fan of those boys club kind of rules. So there are some auctioneers who just offer underwriting because they think it will benefit the seller. So underwriting, you would have heard of underwriting before and probably not really even noticed. So underwriting, you know, every car insurance that you've ever had has been underwritten by UK Insurance Limited, underwritten by Lloyd's of England, underwritten by so-and-so of so-and-so. All of your mortgages have to go through the underwriters. They underwrite your mortgage. What they're basically saying is they're saying, this value, we are underwriting this with the funds that we're going to put forward. So the term probably just isn't you probably haven't applied it in terms of property auctions before. So generally speaking, an underwrite agreement, if someone was to make an offer before the auction on a property, and you speak to one of these auctioneers who does underwriting, and they say, look, the seller would, is open to accepting an offer, but instead of just selling it outright, would you consider doing an underwrite? Now, the majority of auctioneers, the underwrite works like this. It is a separate agreement. It's a promissory document. That document has triggering mechanisms that kick in at certain points in the auction process. So to keep it simple, an underwrite is the guide price is 250, the reserve is 270, but the vendor believes that it's going to sell for 300. And in your heart of hearts, you think, well, 300 is fair value. What you then agree to do is you then agree to underwrite the sale of that property at 275. So what you're saying is, I will guarantee the purchase of this property at 275, come what may. Now, what you do is the vendor signs that document, the underwriter signs that document, and the auctioneer signs that document. Now, normally what that means is the underwriter has to put down a 10% deposit, which is only refundable if somebody pays more than 275 for it at auction. Yeah, because then they don't have to guarantee that. Now, there are certain things to pay attention to here. The agreed profit split, generally speaking, is either 50-50 between the seller and the underwriter, or 45-45-10 to the auctioneer, because the auctioneers are still pushing to sell and getting people in to try and get the most amount of money for the property. It depends on the auction house. There's no right or wrong. So basically what happens is, let's say this property is underwritten at 275. It goes to auction. Nobody in that room, with the exception of the auctioneer, maybe the person who did the administration in the auction office, and the seller, knows that this property is underwritten. The rest of the world have no clue. The bidding goes to 300 and it sells to somebody in the room. The person who then completes at that 300, they still have no idea this property's been underwritten. But at the point of completion, the seller gets the deposit plus all the other monies, but he also gets the differential between the two. So that 12,500, if you did it on a 50-50, just math is easy. The seller and the underwriter will get £12,500 each above, because that's the difference between the underwritten price and the sale price. Yeah, is everyone still with me on this one? It gets a little bit, it's a little bit difficult to grasp for some people. So basically what we're saying is the underwriter is saying, I will pay 275 for this property now and at the auction. But if someone comes along and pays more, then we split the overage, the difference between those two prices. Now, a lot of people really get excited about underwriting, but I will tell you this now: 8 out of 10 times the property sells to the underwriter.
All right, is as high as that, is it?
8 out of 10 times, and the reason for that is you're happy with the price, the seller's happy with the price, and having it underwritten is just a security that means that no one else can then make an offer before the auction and grab it. You're basically securitizing the asset. Now, the 2 times when it doesn't sell to you as the underwriter, one of 2 things can happen. It's important to know these. Well, one of 3 things can happen. One, someone can buy it at auction for more and complete, in which case you get your £12,500 profit and your deposit back. 2, someone pays £300,000 for it at auction and they fail to complete. If they fail to complete, the property then sells to you at 275, because you have underwritten the purchase of that property at 275 unless someone pays more and completes on that purchase. Option 3, and I mentioned this option 3 because a really, really big heavyset national boxing champion did an underwrite deal with us years ago. He did option 3 and he didn't realize how bad option 3 is. So I always use option 3 as whatever you do, don't do this, because he threatened to come in and knock the auctioneer out, and with his fist it probably would have killed him. He basically underwrote the property and then he went to the auction and he bid above his underwrite. But not only did he bid, he overbid because he thought, oh, okay, what I'll do is I'll keep bidding, and then I'll stop, and then someone will bid beyond me, and then I will get my profit between the two is bigger. But if no one bids more than you, you have to put down 2 deposits: the deposit on the underwrite, which is the 275, and then the deposit at, let's call it 350, which is £35,000. So £27,000 or £27,500 plus £35,000. And that's a big problem. Now, there is a calculation out there that which basically says if he paid 350 but underwrote it at 275, he's getting 50 pence of that. If he completes at the 350, at the day of completion, he gets 50% of the uplift between the 275 and 350. But the reality is that doesn't help you, because you're probably going to want to get some kind of funding, and at land registry, it's going to say you paid 350 for it instead of the 275, no matter what kind of cash back you've got for it. So option C is where it goes wrong. Option C is the greed point. It doesn't work when you do that. What you want, and this is important, and rule number 1 in the book on underwriting is only underwrite a property, not because you're speculating profit, but because you want to buy that property. Rule number 2 is don't do anything after that point. Right? Don't do anything after that point. You know, either it sells to you at the 275, which you're happy as Larry with because you wanted it at the 275, or you're going to get some money for free just for guaranteeing its sell. That's it. And it really is a beautiful mechanism if it's used responsibly. It's probably why so many people don't know about it, because if they did, a lot of people would not use it responsibly. And for the some who would make absolute large amounts of money, there'll be others like this heavyweight boxing champion who would not be making that much money and would be very upset with it.
I agree with you. I think it's a sort of win-win for everybody, really, because if you're going to buy a property that you're going to pay that amount for anyway, then the worst that happens, if you do it responsibly, is that you buy the property at the price that you were happy to pay. The alternative is you make a margin on the uplift in the room. So,
and the vendor is happy because the vendor knows. Like, you have to understand, a lot of these people who are selling because they don't want to. They're distressed sellers, so they get to go to that. They wake up on the morning of that auction, instead of tearing their hair out or biting their nails or chewing the lip, or whatever they do. I'm a lip chewer. Whatever it is that they do, you know, once they've got their property underwritten, they're not as worried, because they know that it doesn't matter what happens on the day of the auction, someone's buying it. They've got a deposit. It's already secured. So for a lot of sellers, it works. A lot of sellers don't do it. Traders don't do it. Probates don't do it, repossessions don't do it, LPA receivers don't do it, housing associations don't do it, and local authorities don't do it. But all of those people have got fiduciary duties, and the reason why the traders don't do it is because they don't want to share profit with anybody. It's just the type of people that they are, which is fine. You know, you have to know the nature of the beast to understand it, and I don't judge. But those are the people that won't do it. So the end users, the people who are in a bit of a pickle and are only using auctions because they need to move quickly, they'll be very grateful for someone to come along and say, look, are you happy at this level? If so, I will guarantee this purchase. If it goes for more, we'll both take the benefit of that. But if it doesn't sell, I'm here. I've got this for you.
Yeah.
The chapter on underwriting has got a couple more examples in there, and it runs through the steps of the underwriting process piece by piece. So that will be a lot of value to a lot of people. My last kind of check, I think there's about 15 auctioneers nationwide that do underwriting.
Okay.
The majority of them don't. The chap who runs Savills hates underwriting with an absolute burning passion. He thinks it undermines the auction process, and it does. But actually, you're securing a sale for your client at a value that they're happy with, and you know that's got to be more than that. So that's got to be worth more than that, at least in my view. So a lot of auctions don't do it. The ones that do it, but you'll never hear about, only do it when you're selling. I think Barn and Marcus, last time I spoke to one of their large trader who does get the odd underwrite, he's selling about 30 properties with them a month. And he's considered fairly small fry.
Wow.
Yeah.
But when you say 15, out of how many auction houses are there in total? I'm just trying to get a scale. Right?
Including the small ones that kind of run the odd auction here or there, there's just over 100.
Okay. So sort of 15%. So 15, it's still 15, and they're fairly reasonably sized auction houses.
Yeah, so I mean, you will find that the majority of the auctioneers under the auction house brand, it's the red house with the white writing.
Yeah.
The majority of them do it. There are some that don't because, to be honest, underwriting is a bit of a logistical hassle and a nightmare. And some people just prefer running it cleaner and simpler and easier. Some auctioneers take the stance that they're providing an additional service and they're securing the sale, etc. Depends on where you sit on the fence, but there are other auctioneers outside of that brand that do underwriting, but not many.
Okay, well, I think it's worth getting the book just for that chapter alone, Jay. I thought it was fantastic, and it was a great sort of way to finish the book, because I had actually read all the way through, and it was it's almost like a gift at the end, really. So that actually worked quite well.
Yeah, the last bonus chapters are the ones that everyone leaves the good reviews about, and I start thinking, well, I should have just put out 3 bonus chapters because no one actually talks about what's in the rest of the book. But if you're going to spend I can't remember what it's, $15.99 or whatever, you're going to spend that on the book, then the last 3 chapters are worth that, and their weight in gold. The rest is just really good information to kind of get you through the auction process without making too many mistakes with any luck.
Yeah. I don't think it's got a price on it, actually. Or mine hasn't. No, it hasn't got a price. But whatever the price is, it's worth every penny. Yeah.
But if you sign up for Property Investor News, you get the book for free with that subscription. And if you sign up for Essential Information Group, you get that book for free as well. So we've gone down the route of just make it easy for people to be a part of the auctions. It benefits us in so many different ways. We help people sell, and the more people who know how to use auctions will use auctions, and we buy as well. And actually, we think it's a preferable way to deal with property. So we're part of a very, very small contingent of people who want to make auctions the dominant route of market, which is never going to happen, but it's fun trying.
So absolutely, we've gone over time. I've stolen more of your time than I'd asked for, Jay, and I'm really, really very grateful. I could be here for several hours more. I was really interested in your view about what's the impact of COVID on auctions. I was really interested in terms of where you see auctions going in the future. I was really interested to see why more properties aren't sold through auctions. The 2% is very low. And there's more, but we've got to draw a line somewhere. But there's been so much value and so much really, really good information. I can't thank you enough, Jay, for spending some time with us tonight. I really appreciate it. If you want to leave me a way that people can get hold of you, if need be, then I can put that on our groups as well, Jay. But I'd just really like to thank you again for your wonderful time, and you've got an awful lot of knowledge there, and I know you're a sort of straight shooter as well, and that comes across really, really well. So thank you very much.
I really appreciate having me here.
It's been fantastic. So I'm just going to finish off. Firstly, just to thank. Hopefully, you can see the screen. So I wanted to thank Sam for his talk on mortgage update. There's an awful lot going on in this very volatile area, the whole lending area, and Sam's really, really good, and I'm very thankful for him spending his time with us. Next month, I've got Sylvia Snowlin talking about stamp duty calculations, because there's over 30 reliefs that people can get on stamp duty, and I think it's a not particularly well understood area. So that's going to be really fantastic. I would like to just remind everybody that if you want to sign up to the WhatsApp group, then just let me know. Other than that, I wish you all a happy Christmas. I can't believe we're at that point of the year already. I was going to wear my funny Christmas jumper and my hat, but Lisa talked me out of that because people would laugh more than they normally do. But I wish you all a really lovely Christmas. We'll be back on the 7th of January. I hope your family stay safe. Have a lovely time. And my thanks again to Jay. Really appreciate your time tonight, Jay. So good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Thanks, Jay.
Good night. Thank you. Cheers.